Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bootstrapped Founder podcast. My name is Arvid Kahl, and today I am talking to Michele Hansen, the co-founder of Geocodio, an indie software as a service business in the world of mapping and geolocation. I've been a fan of her work both as a founder and as an active member of the indie hacker community for years now. I followed her journey with the business just as much as her foray into writing her first book, Deploy Empathy. Michele really gets the founder community, and she's a respected teacher of all things customer development. And that's not all Michele has going on. She is also one of the two founders behind the Software Social podcast, where she talks to her friend Colleen on a weekly basis. And this is something that I'm doing in private too, to stay in touch with my friends back in Europe. One call a week, just to chat, recorded just for ourselves as our own little podcast. And I wondered if that's how it started for Michele and Colleen. So I asked, how did that happen? Was it also just because you wanted to talk, wanted to just hang out?
Yeah, so where our podcast came from, Colleen and I met through mutual friends who I think I had met them at MicroConf, and they were like, hey, like Colleen just moved to Arlington, Virginia, where I used to live. And they're like, you should grab coffee with her. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And then it kind of, turned out we were both sort of in this indie space. Like she was a full-time consultant at the time, wanted to have a business going, but also we lived one neighborhood away from each other. Our kids went to the same school. They were similar ages. And so we just became friends really quickly. And we started meeting for coffee every week to just talk about business and life, and did that for quite a while. And then COVID hit, and we, couldn't go meet up at a coffee shop anymore. And then, middle of 2020, we moved to Denmark. And and I realized, I really missed our chats. And, we had kind of joked about making a podcast at some point, but it was never really serious. And then, another one of our friends, actually Benedict from Userlist, he tweeted out how he loves the sort of founder ride-along podcast, but why weren't any women doing any of them? And I just replied to that. I was like, oh, well, Colleen, like, what if we did that podcast we joked about? And like, not really expecting anything of it. And then got a ton of people replying to that tweet and sending me messages privately being like, yes, you should absolutely do that. And we were like, oh, that was a joke. Like,
pretty good one too.
But now, especially like having moved, abroad. And of course, now Colleen is in California, right? So we've both gone like totally opposite directions. Geographically. I think that if I didn't have a scheduled meeting with her every week, I probably would not be as good as at like keeping up with her. Like I have a spoken conversation with her more often than I do any of my other friends in the US. And so there's a certain value in doing a podcast with a friend, because it forces you to talk to them and have it be, an event that is not missed.
Yeah, it's an amazing way of just keeping in touch with people, and also just having another ear for your issues or your wins, your losses, like all these things too. Like that's a building and public thing, the entrepreneur ride along that you're doing. One thing that always comes to my mind when I listen to your show, and I listen to every single episode because I walk the dog a lot, because our little puppy that we got early this year, she needs a lot of walks. She's quite the energetic little thing. And your show is always on because it's the perfect length for the little walk that I do with my pup. And whenever I listen to you guys, I always wonder, how do you set boundaries? And I kind of want to make this whole conversation today about boundaries, because that's something that you in particular have been really good at both expressing and keeping to, at least in my perception. I don't know if you feel the same way about this yourself, but the podcast in particular, I think that's a good opportunity to touch on this topic. The boundary when you have a podcast with somebody is that you have a personal conversation, but it's not a private conversation, right? It's something that you're friends, but you won't talk about everything in public, right? Not everything you talk about on the show or everything you talk about on the show is kind of filtered at a certain level. So how do you draw those lines? You probably wouldn't talk about like relationship issues beyond a certain point, or, you know, financial problems or litigation or stuff like that where it could be a problem. How do you draw this line with that show? Because you're very friendly. You're having a great, often very honest and, you know, sometimes quite confrontational conversation on that show. But it's always, it to me at least, I wonder where this line is.
You know, I think for us, first of all, I think we both have a little bit of a natural sense of what our own boundaries are for what we're willing to talk about in public and what we aren't. And also, I mean, there's offline conversation that people don't see, right? And so we kind of joke that the podcast, yes, people listen to it, but really it's for us, right? Like, you know, we often chat after the show just about life. You know, we have other ways of talking to each other. Mm-hmm. I think for me, when it comes to sharing something that is more, I don't know, more difficult, right? I think for me, the first filter is, is this something that I myself have processed, right? Like, have I had a chance to not even, you know, think it through or move on from it, but like, have I taken the time to sit down with this and process it and at least acknowledge what I'm going through and how I'm feeling about it and talk to somebody about that. And like, do I have a sense of grounding on it? Maybe not perspective yet, but at least do I feel comfortable in that feeling, whether that's business or personal? And then the second one is really, is this something that's relatable to people, and are people gaining by me specifically disclosing this? And if no, then I don't share it. And now, and I don't know if that makes sense, but like, if there's something that is difficult for me, whether it's in the business or in personal life, I feel like the great benefit of being a podcaster is you're podcasting for other people. Like, I guess for our show, and specifically like we say that our job is to make people feel less alone in building their businesses, because many of us, you know, we work alone, or we work or, you know, maybe you work in a co-working space or from your house, or maybe you have one other or two other people you work with, but you're not working in a big company like maybe you're used to, right? Where you're seeing lots of people every day. And loneliness, I think, is a big issue for indie founders. So that's how we view the purpose of the podcast, is first to make ourselves less alone, because it forces us to talk to each other every week. And then second, that we make other people feel less alone. Even just talking about business, even if it's a one-way conversation, makes them feel less alone as they're out walking the dog or whatever it is. And so it's like, is sharing something serving that purpose of making somebody feel less alone? And sometimes hearing somebody's success makes you feel less alone in your own success, right? Because you didn't have anyone to tell about it that would understand your fake internet job, right? Or maybe it's something difficult. And so I think that's kind of the filter that we run everything through, or certainly I do. And then of course there's after the fact, which is that there are times when we say, hey, like, I said that and that came out weird, or I shouldn't have said that, or whatever, and we just edit it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I completely understand this goal of like making people less alone, which is an admirable goal. I really like that. And I say this as a person like living in my own basement, pretty much alone all day, because it's kind of what I chose to be my job at this point. But having the connection with people and just looking and having a look into somebody else's world, that already improves your own world, right? It's just like, even that's why I read a lot of fiction, not to escape in the other worlds, but to enrich my own. And it feels like many people do that too. One question that I have, though, because you had this interesting point where you kind of judge everything you say against, is this good for that purpose or not? Is I always struggle with that myself in anything that I write about or talk about. How can I judge what somebody else would perceive as useful for themselves? You know, it always feels this is some kind of highly subjective rule that I set for myself, some kind of subjective filter. And how do you weigh the potential of you judging something not worth being talked about against, the couple people that it might actually help versus this whole, most people won't benefit from that, because that's what I struggle with highly specific niche topics. It would probably help a lot of people a little, and some people a lot, but this other topic that's more generic would help everybody to a certain extent, but not these people who would need the specific advice. How do you struggle, or how do you deal with that kind of struggle?
I think for me, I think about whether those people are already in my audience, or whether they should be part of that audience, right?
Yeah, right.
Every episode is not for every person, right? That's, what is the quote that you can please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time. And sometimes it's all the people none of the time. But I guess that's what I run it through. It's like, and often it's like, would this have helped me 7 years ago?
Yeah, that's right.
8 years ago, 9 years ago? Would this have been something that helped me when we were thinking about side projects and trying to get something going, or we had a side project and we're trying to balance that, or 5 years ago when I still didn't feel like I was a part of the indie founder community and didn't really know anybody? Like, would this have helped me then, or heck, would this have helped me 6 months ago? I think that's kind of the filter that I look at it through. There's an infinite amount of things that any person could share that inevitably another human being would find relatable, right? I think this is the kind of the beautiful thing about humanity, is that we have so much in common with other people. And if we open up about it, then we will find those things. But it doesn't necessarily mean those people are standing in front of you. And also when we go into something more specific, we try to limit it. And so we'll just do one episode on that, and then we'll kind of go on to other things, because it's not as relevant to everybody, but there is a group that would really appreciate being seen and hearing about that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, also the choices you make, right? In what you talk about, what you don't talk about, that's your unique voice. That's the things, or those are the things that people will associate with you. And some people might self-select out of your audience because of it, and other people will select into your audience, which in the end is a win-win situation for everybody, right? Because you get the people you want to talk to, who care about the topics you talk about, and the people who don't, well, they listen to somebody else. I think that's a great point. Like, that you limiting yourself allows people to make a discerning choice, and then either listen to you or Joe Rogan, or somebody else that they find like more appealing, or whatever it is. I think, yeah, that makes sense to me. That I'm interested in this because it feels to me that we always have this perfectionist approach. We want everybody to be happy. We want to serve as many people as possible with the things that we build. And you building Geocodio, you probably know this too. Like, you have customers that are perfect for your business, and then there are the customers who you could serve, but should you? Like that's another level of setting a boundary, but in this case, not for what you talk about, but for what your business does. How do you do this with your own customers? Like, how do you make sure that you serve the right customers with your software as a service business that you run?
It's a continual process to be serving the right customer segments and figuring out where we're a good fit and where we aren't. The first way, quite frankly, is to see who's paying you all the time, right? If a customer has been paying you every month for 6 months, a year, 4 years, chances are what you do is a good fit for what they're doing. And maybe there are other things that they're doing manually or using other services for that are adjacent to what you do that they would love if you did even more of. And so I like to start with those customers that I'm already, or our business is already a good fit for, and grow from there. It's much easier to grow a business by understanding what people already like about what you do, whether that is a podcast or a SaaS, and doubling down on that and understanding what is it that brings them to you and why you specifically. What are the advantages you have in their eyes over the competition? How do you speak to those? How do you use their words to market to them? Understand which features are important to them. Because if you serve the happy customers, you will be a happier founder. And now there's a lot of analysis that needs to go into that. This is actually something I got to dive into recently on my own podcast, talking about moats and competitive advantages with Matt Wensing of Summit, because we can't just listen to our customers and just build everything that everybody says. We have to filter that and understand what is in scope for our company and what isn't, and where are there advantages for our company and where aren't there. And that is a kind of filtering that only the founder can do, or usually the product manager at a big company. But we're an indie crowd, so we're usually doing the product strategy ourselves.
I was gonna say, for small SaaS, that's a different choice, and you have to make that choice. Like, particularly, how many people are you? Are you still just 2 people in your company, or are you more at this point?
We made our first hire in July.
Ooh.
So the company is my husband and I as co-founders, and then we hired a former coworker of his as our content and support engineer.
Oh, that's cool. So you have like some kind of well, okay, 3 people is still that's small, but it's also big, because like the smallest unit is 0 that's not having a business at all. But my question here really is, like, how do you not overstep what this unit of 3 people can do? Right? How do you not overreach into yet another adjacent feature or yet another potential rocket ship to the moon kind of product that might revolutionize your industry? Lots of people have really high ambitions there. How do you keep to the core of what makes your business work? Like, do you have any metrics or any kind of just framework strategies to keep that in place, like to stay on course?
Here's an example of something. I have a decision where we decided to not proceed with the feature. For years, we've had people ask us about global geocoding. So when we launched, we supported the US only, and shortly thereafter added support for Canada. And pretty much since the beginning, people have been asking for more international support and really global support. And I think we launched an alpha of global geocoding in... can't remember the year, but I remember we lived in our old house. Isn't it funny how we remember things like that?
Yeah, my places.
So I want to say this was probably 2016, 2017. Mm-hmm. And we quickly realized, even with only having 1 or 2 customers using this alpha, who were long-term customers, who were very nice and understanding people, that for a small team, the world is a very big place. And, and we simply could not handle the scale of problems that could happen doing worldwide address to coordinate conversions, that we just simply couldn't do it. Now, that was an inflection point. We could have decided, yes, we're going to do this. We are the people to do this. Let's go. Let's get some funding. Let's go full time now. Like, we are the people to do this because there's an opportunity there. We instead looked at that and said, all right, there's a million other companies doing this. Most of them are extremely well funded. You may have heard of them, like they're called Microsoft and Google, as well as some very well financed VC-backed companies like Mapbox, and some indie competitors as well. And we're like, you know what? We can't compete with that. And so instead, we decided to say, okay, well, what are people using us for that other people aren't doing? And this is really what led us down the path of focusing more on data enrichment, for example. So coordinates are a doorway to information about an address. So for example, you can't determine what someone's time zone is unless you have the coordinates for their address. And so we started to understand all of these other adjacent use cases. And we learned that, hey, if we can save people from having to hit 8 different APIs with all these different formats and pricing and data storage policies and wrangling all that data, and they can just get it in one request from us, they will pay us and they will keep paying us. And so that was a strategic decision that we made, that another company, and I mean, quite frankly, other companies have made different decisions at that inflection point. But that was a decision on staying a small team, and I think being humble, quite frankly, about what we were able to solve and what we weren't, that continues to guide us.
That's interesting because it's quite literally a boundary as a as a geographical boundary that you chose for your product and your business. And I like it because you focus inward, right? You look at what can we do with what we already have instead of where can we go beyond what we have right now, right? You don't look at you don't look at the greener grass over there. That's pretty much what it is, right? You look at what you can do to fertilize the grass that you already have in your backyard. Which brings me to another point. You seem to do a lot of gardening and a lot of like apple cider pressing and that kind of stuff. And that's, I don't know, I was thinking about what I would like to talk to you about, because it's you share a lot of things quite openly on Twitter, which I'm very grateful for, because I get to have a glimpse into the little Danish life that you live, and it's really nice. And on the show too, you talk about these things. I wonder, like, with all these things going on in your life, podcasts, right? Appearances on podcasts, running Geocodio, learning a second language, or probably, no, is it your second language, or do you have a couple others in there as well? Right?
This is the fifth language I have studied.
Okay.
I would not say I am fluent in any other language. Deutsch is mein zweiten, what is it?
Wow.
What's the word for a language? It's been like 10
Sprache.
years. Sprache! Oh my
There
gosh.
you go.
Deutsch is mein zweiten Sprache.
Wow.
No, and then I married a Dane and stopped practicing it.
Close enough.
That's on the list for after I finish.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, after I finish, right? With languages, does that ever happen? Well, this is what I'm thinking about, because there's so many things. These are kind of open-ended projects, right? Podcasts, you can run them forever. Businesses, hopefully, run them forever. And learning should never end anyway. So how do you manage that? Like, how do you juggle family too? Like, you have a decent-sized family and, you know, like building projects. I guess the room in which you're currently recording this is also one of these things that, you know, has been part of your journey. How do you manage these things? Because these are a lot of things. And most founders, they try to focus on building a business and ignore everything else. How does that work? Because I want to know.
I mean, honestly, the truth is that I just have to have a lot of projects going on. Just interested in a lot of things. I don't think I necessarily manage all of it well. So there's a difference between seeing the life that somebody posts on
The Instagram
Twitter,
highlight reel,
even though
right?
I'm not like trying to like project like a perfect Instagram life, right? But like, you know, you might see my tomato plants and our shed quarters on Twitter, and like what you don't see is the fact that yes, I have been in our lovely little shed quarters in the yard all day, and also the whole day intending to take a long walk with the dog and finding time to eat the healthy lunch that I packed. And it's 3:30 and I haven't found time for any of that. I barely had enough water today because I was fighting with various state sales tax websites. So
Yeah.
I how do I manage it? Honestly, not well.
Yeah,
like
that's right.
if we're being truly honest, I have a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm, and you know, I think thankfully I have a good amount of follow through. My husband certainly has an even better follow through gene than I do. So, you know, we work as a team, and I don't know. It's a work in progress, though.
That's
man.
right?
Like...
If it isn't, like, what is it? Like, I think there's only two other states that work in progress, and that's didn't start or just finished and stopped doing what you wanted to do, right? Those are the other two. But honestly, no, I didn't expect like a perfect guide to managing your life. I don't think anybody has this. But I think what you do is you at least are good at compartmentalizing the things that you do, right? That from what I see, which is again a filtered perspective, obviously. And even though you share with me that you do struggle, like everybody struggles to a certain degree, it just seems that you still get stuff done, which is nice. Right. And what I think it is, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, is that you don't have like extremely super high expectations. You have an iterative approach to stuff. Like that's what I guess anyone building in public, sharing these little updates, these tiny little wins, tiny losses, whatever it might be, they understand that it doesn't have to be this grand goal. Just doing anything is fine. Anything towards that goal. Is that how you approach your projects as well?
Yeah, I think it's always a work in progress. I remember when I first learned about the idea of Kaizen, um, and and I learned about it sort of out of context, right? Not within the context of the Toyota manufacturing system and everything else, but just as this idea of the goal is continual progress. And I get a lot of satisfaction and feeling of completion about having the next version of something out. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't feel that kind of itch to keep improving things. I constantly do. But I enjoy the climb, so to speak, of it. And I think that's really important for anything that you do. That I used to look at goals and be like, okay, I will be happy when I reach the goal. And you know what happened? That never happened.
Yeah.
Like that elusive happiness when X happens, it never happened. And so at some point I was able to shed that and just try to, find a way to find completion and a sense of progress in the progress itself. And also quite frankly, being an entrepreneur, I can self-select into the processes, which is, running a business is a process, right? That I find rewarding throughout the journey. I think I found that when I'm doing something where all I can think about is the end result and I'm suffering through the process of it, that's not something for me.
Yep. Yeah, I very much agree. I think my own personal experience is the exact same thing, particularly after selling the company. Like, you would think that having this great exit and all the financial things around it would be life-changing in an emotional sense, but it's only really in a fiscal sense, if at all, right? Like, we were still the same people, just like having opened one more champagne bottle in our lives. That was really it. But everything around us, like all the passion we had for work, the things that we wanted to do, that was still there. Nothing really changed, right? We reached a goal, but there was not this emotional upheaval that we expected there to be. And I guess that changed my perspective too on like finding a path to walk instead of a destination to walk towards. I love the books by Brandon Sanderson, the fiction writer, and he has a quintology out at this point called the Stormlight Archives, and one of the main themes of these like thousands of pages per book series, which I really like, is journey before destination. That's the idea. The idea is that the journey is the part why you do it. The destination is just kind of where you aim, so where this is essentially kind of going, but the journey is the interesting part, and the journey is the thing why you do it, not the destination. And I really like the phrase "enjoy the climb" because that's essentially what it is. Every single day.
Quoting Miley Cyrus, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't you? Right? I mean, that's art informs life and reality, and I think that is one that is really, really relatable to me as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and now as a writer. And we should talk about that part too. But let's stay with the founder entrepreneur space for a second longer, because the reason why I talked to you today is because we had a little conversation on Twitter, and it was about the psychological challenges of becoming a founder. Right? You talk about the challenges of being a founder, but even getting to this point, like becoming somebody who throws away their structured 9-to-5 life and becomes somebody who is only responsible for themselves and their family and their business, that is quite an intense thing to do. And enjoy the climb. The phrase just triggers in me this steep hill that has fog on top. You can't even see where you're going. You just see that something is climbing, and you make this active choice of leaving the lush green valley behind you with the village and all the amenities, and you look into the hill to climb towards the top. And you said something in that conversation that we had on Twitter that it was really between, you have to enjoy the challenges if you're an entrepreneur, and an employee does not necessarily have to do that. Like somebody who works full-time job, even though isn't entrepreneurship a more than full-time job, right? Like obviously we spend all day working on the thing while an employee does not. But what I wanted to ask you is what kind of challenges did you in particular experience going from your, I think you had a PM position, like product management position, into entrepreneurship with family on the line, with not knowing where this was going to go? I know that Geocodio came from a different project even. Like, can you talk about these psychological challenges and how you overcame them for yourself?
Well, I think it probably makes sense to start out on that sort of philosophical, psychological level. And you might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? This is a core idea from psychology that, the bottom, this pyramid, right? So we're talking about mountains and pyramids today. At the basic level, you have your needs for shelter and food. And then as you go up the pyramid, you have needs for, socialization and intellectual fulfillment and all these other things. And eventually at the top, you have self-actualization. Now, without getting into Maslow and kind of loosely using that, right? I think a challenge that I certainly face, and I see other people face as well, is that to a certain degree, when you have a stable full-time job, you have self-actualized in that role, right? You are getting a steady paycheck. You know that, we're in a very tough economic environment right now, but you can be relatively confident that you're going to be able to pay your mortgage next month and buy groceries, and you have a certain role within that company, and in turn within your community. You have an identity. You can say, this is what I am. This is what I do. Now, the fact that people so tightly couple what we do with our identities now is a whole different conversation. But that gives us this sense of stability in our lives. And to then intentionally switch away from that requires a lot of mental work. Even if you're not happy in your job, you still have an identity that is tied to that job, and the fact that you and your family's, physical, social, emotional, dietary needs are all basically being met by that job. And so to sort of switch all of that inertia over to something else is mentally a very, very difficult switch. Even if it's something that you have looked forward to your entire life, it might still be difficult. And I think sometimes people underestimate this, and they don't realize how much of a change it's going to mean, even if just from, working remote from their basement, but in a company of 500 people where they're on a team, and how much that gives them a sense of identity and purpose versus working from their basement by themselves alone. Even if they're still a software developer functionally, right? Like there has been an identity shift there, and it can be really difficult to rebuild and sort of self-actualize after a big transition like that.
Yeah, identity conflation is that sounds like a problem, where you overlap your sense of who you are with your sense of what you do, and it becomes the same. Feels like entrepreneurs have that problem too, in a funny way, right? But if you are a solopreneur, if you are an indie hacker, you want to stay an indie hacker. And everything beyond that, which is like the whole term unemployable, like becoming unemployable, it seems to be almost a meme in the community. Where I use it too. Like, I don't feel I want to be employable. Do I want somebody else to tell me what I do? Because I've now lived those many years as somebody who told himself what to do, and nobody could ever tell me. Of course, customers tell you what to do all the time, right? Like, their behavior very much influences, if not even decides, what you do. So you don't have full control anyway, but you tell yourself that, and your identity becomes this. I think there's barely any difference really between having a job and be defining yourself as an enterprise software developer, or a solo entrepreneur software developer. The kind of conflation is the same. How did you overcome that for yourself? Like when you started the project that then led to Geocodio, was it a side project that had happened kind of organically, or how did that happen for you?
Yeah, so that's actually jumping back 3.5 years to the start of it. So we initially got side projects going, mostly just as a way to get extra money. Daycare, for example, in the US is really, really expensive. It's like $24,000 a year for infant care. It's more expensive than college in a majority of states. And so, we had a baby on the way and people told us it was expensive, but then you go around and we actually found out how expensive it was. And so that kind of lit the fire under us to really start launching side projects so we could just simply, afford that or keep the same level of our life. And it was from that, we launched our first app together. And then through the process of that app, which was making a couple $100 a month in ad revenue, we realized we needed geocoding for it. We couldn't use the major providers for a variety of reasons because they wouldn't let us store the data, and their pricing wouldn't let us pay for more than the free tier at the time. And so we built our own very rudimentary geocoder and told some friends about it. And they're like, oh, hey, I have the same problem. Like, why don't you just slap it like a paywall in front of this, and maybe other people will pay for the servers for it. And we're like, oh, that would be awesome. And so when we launched it, our definition of a wild success was making $20 a month to pay for the 2 little DigitalOcean droplets we had running it.
Start low, right? Like set really, really small goals.
Really,
and
I mean,
yourself.
that was it. Was to have other people pay to host this, so we didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And then, I'm skipping a lot here, but then it took 3.5 years until we went full time. So it was really the low and slow barbecue method of building a business.
So did you work like still full time in your day job until that point? Wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
even
we
more
both
impressive.
Had full-time jobs. So I was a product manager. My husband Matthias was a software engineer at a startup. So we both worked 9 to 5 and then some jobs, and found time for Geocodio on the weekends and at night. And what was so great about it at that point is that when you work in a company, there is higher stakes to what you do. Like you can't just be like, hey, like this new JavaScript framework seems really cool, let's use it. Right? Because you can't do that. Or like, oh, like let's try out this new method of doing like onboarding. You've got to go and make a business case for that, right? And so we could just try stuff and it didn't matter. And if we lost money, that was on us. And that was liberating, especially when it wasn't our full-time job, that it was like, yeah, let's just try this and see if it works. And so it was our little professional playgrounds basically for improving our skills and getting to try new things. And, and at that point, there wasn't too much sort of bureaucratic overhead. So it was fun. And I guess that gets back to enjoying the climb, right? Like we enjoyed the climb of it being a side project and getting to that point. Now, not everybody has that luxury, like, right? There's a lot of people who work 2 jobs and don't have the time or energy to have a side project going. Or they have other demands on their life or time that don't allow them to do that. Or they need to go full time sooner, or they see the opportunity to. And quite frankly, I think that's what drives me to now invest in other indie style companies, I guess I will call them, through like Tiny Seed and Calm Fund, because I never really considered our business like an investable business, sort of from a VC perspective, for a variety of reasons. But thinking back, I was like, if I had had that option, I probably would have gone full time sooner, through Tiny Seed or Calm, because you don't have to go through 3.5 years of it being a side project until you can get full time. That takes a toll on someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm grateful there's other options now.
Well, one of the main benefits of Calm and Tiny, I feel, being also part of the Calm Fund, is the mentorship network that comes with it. Because most people who build their businesses, they as a side project too, they don't know anything really, right? They don't know like how to scale some part of your business enough, but not too much, right? And not where to put your attention, what needs to come next, and all that kind of stuff. Just even figuring out if you're in the right niche, or if you should expand somewhere, or how to deal with certain problems that every entrepreneur has to deal with, but you have not yet. All of this stuff can just eat up so much of your time, and precious time too, if it's a side project, if it's a moonlighting thing, right? If you do it this from 9 to 10 every night, it's the only time you can spend on your business. You better use that hour, use in a way that has impact on the business. And if you don't know what to do, everything is experimentation. That's a problem. So yeah, I very much agree with you on this. And I think this is also what the Twitter build in public entrepreneurial community does a lot, trying to help people figure out a path. Not necessarily how to walk it, but at least where to look for it. That's kind of what it is. That is interesting. I did not really know. I mean, I knew a couple things about the business, but 3.5 years, that is a lot of time to run a side project. And what was the sign for you to make that switch? Was it an MRR or like a feeling or something? Like I wonder, because for us, when we did it, we had a number. We knew that this monthly recurring revenue, I think it was somewhere around 15,000. It's funny. I knew we had a number, but I cannot recall the number. That's where it is. But we had something where it said, this is what we could pay ourselves now, knowing the margins of the business, and it's better than what we had before from where we were at this point, both me as a software engineer and Danielle as an online teacher. So we knew our numbers and we knew the business did this. Now it's time to go full-time on it. How did that happen for you? What was the choice?
Ours was very different. We did not have a number. And I think I was actually afraid of being a full-time entrepreneur, quite frankly. I didn't know if I was capable of it. And I felt like it was too risky. Like I liked, I mean, having a full-time job has pros and cons, but it is, by and large, stable, right?
Supposedly.
Supposedly, right? I mean, and that's part of the point, right? But when I was a kid, my dad was a software consultant, and I remember, that sometimes things were a little bit up and down, or our health insurance was terrible, which, I mean, people who are not from the US, like, you have such an advantage not having to worry about health insurance. Like, oh my God. Like, it's hard to explain the level of stress that puts on someone who wants to be an entrepreneur in the US. Like, it's just, it's massive, and it's a huge financial hurdle. Right? Because, yeah.
Every
Sorry.
story
I
is
mean,
a
it's just
horror
I'm losing this. Yeah. Yes, this story is about how in the US there's no social safety net because we started a business because of daycare, and then health insurance was a consideration going full time.
Yeah, really, right?
No, but so for me, and also, we have a family. And so I think thinking back to my own experiences with entrepreneurship as a kid, having positive ones, but also that sort of negative side of it. But also remembering, my dad works in tech, and there's layoffs every couple of years, regardless of how good of a job you do. If company says 10-20% cut, like that's it. Or they fold, right? So, it got to a point where the business was actually really stable, and I felt like I could trust the revenue, which is weird, and it kind of anthropomorphizes it is not the right word because it's not an animal, but like personifies it a little bit, because I think for the first 2 years, I basically woke up every day and being like, oh, you know what? Google could change something in their pricing. Amazon could enter this market, and we're wiped out, right? Like, all the customers will leave. We're gone. This has been a nice ride. We've paid off my student loans. It was a good run, but like, it's over. I
There's
literally
another
thought
financial
that,
problem.
Yes, this is a very American perspective on this, because we are traumatized financially, Arvid.
No, Feedback Panda was also like the initial thing that Feedback Panda did for us was also pay off Danielle's student loans. So I completely understand.
But I pretty much woke up every day thinking this could just go away. And it really wasn't until that third year when I could see, hey, actually, there's people who've been paying us for 2 years now, like, and they're paying us every month, and they're sticking around. And I think also I started to learn about things about competitive advantage and moats and more about business and investing. And I started to see the potential in the business, but was still afraid of being an entrepreneur. Matthias had wanted to go full time for a long time. His parents are also entrepreneurs. And So I was the one holding us back. But then, I mean, it was a very personal decision. The company I was at, where I was very happy, there was a big reorg and it was unfavorable for my department. And I decided to leave. And actually, when I quit, I started applying for jobs. And I didn't know whether I was going to go full time on Geocodio or not. So I just did some interviews. And I remember sitting in an interview and, you know, I had, you know, in my resume, you know, with customers, including, you know, the Red Cross and like blah, blah, blah for my side project. And I remember one of the developers on the team being like, so if you have this successful like software business on the side, why are you applying for jobs? And it wasn't a critical question. It wasn't coming from a judgment or a place of threat. He was just confused. And I was like, I really hadn't thought about that.
Yep.
And, you know, a big thing for me was, am I being selfish by doing the thing that will make me happier, even if it is more unstable for my family? Because I looked at entrepreneurship as bad health insurance, up and down revenue, like it just felt unstable to me. But then one of my friends was like, you know what? If you are happier in your work, you will be a better spouse and a better parent, and you will work to make it work. You will find a way to make it stable. You will find a way to make it work. And that really shifted things for me because yeah, I really almost viewed it as a selfishness on my own part to consider being an entrepreneur. And, but that helped me. But I mean, it took me months years even to really identify as an entrepreneur and not feel, I guess, kind of sheepish about it.
Do you consider this a cultural thing? Like something that was instilled in you at some point, or is more like a personality issue? I wouldn't even call it that, but you know, like where does it come from? I always wonder with these kind of things, the stories we tell ourselves, right? Where do they come from? Certainly we didn't make them up. They have to come from somewhere.
I mean, I think I'm a very financially cautious person in general, right? So given, you know, the experience I had growing up, but also my first week of college was the financial crisis. And so everybody ran around talking about how their college funds were gone 1 week into it. Like it was, you know, there was a lot of financial trauma going on. And I, you know, come from a, you know, middle-class background, right? So, I don't know if that's cultural or just simply life experiences that versus, you know, Matthias, like he grew up in Denmark. They never had to worry about health insurance. If you don't have a job, the government pays for it. They'll pay for your house. Like, you know, there wasn't, you know, there wasn't that same level of sort of repeated financial trauma or the threat of instability. You know, his family, you know, they weren't wealthy, but like there was never that threat of instability, whereas it was kind of always there for me and for a lot of other people I know. And I don't know if you could say that's a culture thing or it's just a life experience thing that a lot of people share.
Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like a generational trauma in some regard even, right? Like it feels like a social, like, yeah, because I'm from Germany, pretty much Denmark in many, many regards, right? When it comes to social security systems and any kind of education up to the highest levels being paid for by the government and all these kind of things. Like I've never wanted for anything in my life, really. Even when I had no money, people even paid partially for my place to live. And there was all government. Like, that's why we have extremely high taxes, which we, by the way, noticed when we sold our business, right? But yeah, that comes kind of with being a European. You have these systems that make you pay a lot in taxes, but you also get a lot when you don't have any money. It's a social equalizer in many ways. So I feel the same way. I never felt threatened. And it's interesting to hear. So thank you for sharing this perspective that you have this kind of undercurrent of fear of losing everything. Kind of, that's what it sounds like. Right? You never know. Am I going to be able to go to a hospital tomorrow? And that is a whole other thing, right? Like the horrendous medical prices, like even with insurance, it could mean like any accident could mean a large financial backlash that you would have to take credit for, whatever weird thing you would need to do to deal with this. So would you say that every US entrepreneur kind of carries this trauma with them? Like, do you feel this is a common thing?
I don't think I can speak for everybody, but there's everybody has their stories probably of how in some ways financial instability has driven their decision making. And I think it's important to see that people's decisions make sense from their own perspective, from their own lived life experience. For me, something I thought about was how when I graduated from college, where you probably had support from the government for being unemployed as a recent graduate and housing and everything, I spent my life savings on my first month's rent, and I had $31 left over for the entire month. I couldn't afford heat. Like, I could barely afford groceries. I biked everywhere because I couldn't afford to take the subway. And I look at that and I say, there's no way that I could subject my family to that. And I think that was, for me, something that was, yes, I dealt with it and I'm fine for it. But I could never say to my kids, sorry, like you can't sign up for, this sport or whatever because I did the selfish thing and chose to be an entrepreneur. I don't think it's selfish to be an entrepreneur, but that is the mean voice in my head speaking. And it took me a really long time to, tell it somewhere between tell it to shut up and prove to it that there was enough data. Then I was like, because actually at that point when I went full time, Geocodio was making 4 times my salary. And I had been just, crawling at a slow pace up in my salary, right? And it was, it was 4 times my salary, and I still didn't trust it because it was just, what if this disappears overnight?
That's pretty much it. Rings a bell, like with me. Like, we did this with not 4x but with 2x. Like, our business was doing twice what we together would make in a month, and that's when we chose to say, okay, like, if we now pay ourselves, that means that there's more money in the company and that the company itself is valuable, so we might be able to sell it. It was also the time. I think it's also a timing thing for many people, like particularly with software businesses. Now that there's micro-acquire and all these kind of acquisition platforms around, or even just the brokers that are out there, you can still get some kind of value out of a company that's kind of winding down, right? Somebody else might take it. Somebody else might try to take a run at it and turn it into something else. So there's value in even a company that doesn't do well. But I completely understand this hesitation because it is a big risky move to make, and particularly with a family to support and with the fear of what if it doesn't work. Right? It makes a lot of sense for this to stay a side project. That's something that I advocate to a lot of people who come from financial backgrounds of instability too, in general, right? Like, if you don't know what you're going to be doing and if it's going to be successful, don't waste your life savings on this 6-month runway of a dream that you have for a business. Like the idea, the idea that you think is going to revolutionize whatever industry you're in probably won't. And you probably have to change it. And then you can wonder, was it a good idea? Was it not? Hey, if you are in this stage, you should definitely not commit all your funds to starting a business. No matter where you are, even if there is a social net, it feels like a side project, a moonlighting, kind of community-driven, kind of, look at what people actually suffer from, what they actually need to be solved instead of going for your big idea. That kind of project seems to me, in the long run, to be the better way into building something valuable, meaningful, that can actually sustain a life. And I see this with you and what you do, like and what you share about your business as well, right? You're now dealing with problems that are by far not as foundational, at least that's what it seems like, as they probably were like 2-3 years ago. Like, you were talking about sales tax websites and that kind of stuff. I've been following your podcast, of course, and you talking about your certification and these things. That is when you already have momentum, you get to deal with these problems, right? They get to be annoying when the foundations are stable. How do you feel about that? Like, is this still annoying? Are you still working on these things? How's it going with that?
No, I mean, I feel like the foundations are stable, and I think that's what gave us, really the confidence to go full time, both of us, and realizing actually they had been stable for a while. at that point. And yeah, to what we were talking about, the journey, right? The problems I'm dealing with now, sales taxes, SOC 2 compliance, figuring out how to be a good manager. These are very, very different problems that are almost luxury problems compared to the kind of problems that we had in 2014, 2015, 2017. The business itself, not just sort of the company, but how we make money, how we provide value to other people, how they pay us for that, how we acquire new customers. All of those things have been sorted out at this point. And so now if we think about, the business as something that is going up that Maslow's triangle of self-actualization, right? Like we have solved that base level of what is it that we do? Where does this live? And then where does this fit in the market and whatnot? We're always sort of continually climbing and improving, but yes, it's an entirely different set of problems and challenges that we face right now than we did 8.5 years ago. And I think we're continually surprised that we continue to enjoy those new challenges that come up, and that we're not bored of it. Matthias and I were talking about this a couple months ago, and it was like, he's like, yeah, like I'm just surprised, like that I'm still excited to work on the same code base I've been working in for 8.5 years. And, sure, sometimes you look at it and you're like, God, what idiot wrote that? And it was, him 6 years ago, right? Or like I did something, and it's like, but I guess I get satisfaction out of being like, man, like me 5 years ago was such an idiot, or heck, me 2 weeks ago, right? I get satisfaction out of that. I like to see that I have grown and become smarter or wiser or savvier in running the business. And I guess that's probably important to being able to do this long term, or really enjoy anything, is kind of not just laughing at yourself, but also being able to recognize your own growth.
Yeah, I think so. Like that's a big part of entrepreneurship, is like loving to learn, and loving to look back at the mistakes you made, and laughing about that, and understanding that you've grown like from that point to today in incredible ways that you would never thought possible. And I think you do this a lot, because you not only do you look at these things, but then you actively, publicly talk about your learnings, and you share them with people. You teach. And that's maybe the last thing I would like to talk to you about, because it's been something that connects me a lot with you, being a fellow writer. Is the book that you've written on the things that you've learned from all the many, many hundreds of thousands of conversations, I guess, that you had with people in like sourcing information, figuring out stuff, like Deploy Empathy, a book that I have 2 copies of, one of which is signed, and I'm super happy about that because it's really nice. So, like your book has been inspirational to me, and probably a lot of other people, in approaching people in an empathetic and a kind and in an understanding way. And I feel that is just such a great thing for you to have done, being a founder that had success, that had learned how to do something right, and then sharing it with the community at large for the low price of, it's just a really, really cool thing that I've seen you do, is give back. The book itself didn't happen as a book initially, right? Like, how did that whole thing start? Because I love the story of things that just emerge, and it's definitely an emergent project. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, after I went full time and kind of started to get to know other indie founders, discovering that this whole world was even out there, really, eventually started investing in other companies and started helping other people with their product strategy and understanding customers, and realizing that I didn't have one place I could send people that was sort of a soup to nuts guide to customer research that was approachable by an indie founder, right? So there's a lot of great books from a UX and a product perspective, but they're usually written for much bigger companies or people who come from product and UX backgrounds. They're not really written for software developers who are starting their own company. And then there's also the mom test, which I think is great, but it focuses on the discovery phase. And it's like, okay, well, what if people are trying to figure out why they have churn, or which features they should build next, or why people keep paying them so they can find out how to shift their marketing to attract more people like them, so they get more people who will happily pay them for a long time. And so I didn't have one place I could send people. And so I was like, oh, maybe I should write a book. But this was in the middle of lockdown, and I remembered what anyone I've ever talked to who wrote a book, maybe except you, said, that writing a book is a lonely process. And this was lockdown in the middle of Scandinavian winter, and I was like, man, I do not need any more loneliness in my life right now. I should not write a book. And then I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? But this newsletter thing, this is interesting. I've heard about this. Like, maybe I'll just start writing it out. Like, I can write an email. The idea of writing a book scares me. I don't, like, quite frankly, I was afraid of that, right? But I write so many emails every day. I can write an email, right? Like, I can do that. And so then it just started out as the newsletter, and it was like, you know what? And if it turns into a book, people want that, great. If it's just a newsletter, and then when other founders have these questions, I can just send them to the newsletter archive, even better. And so it did start out with low expectations. And I think if I had set out saying, I am going to write a book that's going to sell over 2,000 copies and be #1 on Product Hunt, I never would have started. Yet because of the fact that I was like, I'm just going to write this, and maybe a couple of my founder friends will find this useful, and then maybe I can send people to it later, with very, very low expectations, but enjoying the process of doing it, I eventually got to that point where it's sold over 2,000 copies and was #1 on Product Hunt, and, all of that. But going into it with low expectations, not having that sort of, the goal was not some external metric that other people decided. It was my own goal of having a place to send people, which was really not a lofty goal. And I think that was key to how I did it.
Well, I'm really thankful you did choose these to have these low expectations, because I think that's a common theme in how you approach stuff. Like, low expectations allow you to surprise yourself, which is, always nice. It's always a positive surprise, never a disappointing one. And enjoying the process more than the result leads to a better result. It's just like with everything you do, right? If you like what you're doing, whatever you do becomes a better thing. If you're a painter and you don't have the final image in mind, but you like exploring, writers do the same. Like in fiction, there's outline writers and there's discovery writers. And outline writers write the whole story in outline form before they start writing a single piece of prose. And then there's discovery writers who just write, okay, I guess this is my character. Let's see what she does. And that leads to a story. And many of the greatest stories have been written in this discovery form, where people just let themselves enjoy the moment of writing, the moment of creation. And I see this in what you do, and I want to bring this to a close. So I just want to say thank you for writing a great book, sharing what you know on Twitter all the time, sharing what you don't know on Twitter all the time as well, sharing what you do on Twitter all the time, having the podcast going, your podcasts, your appearances, all these things. You're just a great person to follow, to be around and to talk to, obviously. So thank you so much also for having a chat with me today. Maybe as a final question, where can people find you, and where do you want people to find you the most?
You are very kind, Arvid. It really means a lot to me. People can find me on Twitter, where I, quite frankly, probably spend too much time.
You're not alone.
But it's fun to hang out with people, isn't it? Like, I mean, I log on and they're like, oh, I can talk to people in Japan and Australia and sitting next to me at my desk as well. Like, anyway, yes, at MJW Hansen on Twitter. And from there, you'll find links to other stuff, my book and whatnot. But Twitter is kind of my home base on the internet.
Yeah, mine too. I spent way too much time there as well, and it's absolutely worth it, at least for what I do. I mean, some people might probably call it a waste of time in their profession, but I think for being in a community and engaging with people all the time, learning stuff, like teaching stuff, learning stuff, all of that, Twitter is the perfect platform. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're not on Twitter, you should be. You should follow Michele there as well. So thank you so much for being on today. That was wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today. Thank you for listening to the Bootstrapped Founder podcast. You can find me on Twitter at ArvidKahl, ARVIDKAHL, and you'll find my books Zero to Sold and The Embedded Entrepreneur, and my Twitter course Find Your Following there as well. If you want to support this podcast and me, please go to ratethispodcast.com/founder and leave a rating and a review if you can find the time. It would be an amazing and very helpful gesture. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.